So today's presentation, and this will be the last presentation that I'm giving. And for the next two meetings, there's an opportunity for any of you guys to present something. Amanda will be presenting on music and spirituality. And if you're feeling uncomfortable doing like that, we can have an open discussion. So it's pretty free for the next two meetings as the semester closes. But today is about Vedic wisdom and consciousness studies. So what is consciousness studies? We have some snippets here from different academic institutions that are working with consciousness studies. The Goddard College says an exciting and emerging area of study, consciousness studies focuses on the transformative experiences, practices, and beliefs of many cultural, religious, spiritual, and psychotherapeutic traditions. The consciousness studies concentration, available to students enrolled in individualized MA within the Goddard Graduate Institute, is an interdisciplinary education that draws upon a number of disciplines, including the neurosciences, philosophy of mind, anthropology of consciousness, Jungian psychology, religious studies, psychology, the arts, and the humanities. The Bircham International University, which is a distance learning university online, says this program of consciousness studies integrates ideas from psychology, philosophy, modern physics, religion, neuroscience, cognitive science, anthropology, and linguistics with the purpose of understanding what is consciousness and how it works. Consciousness refers to the individual awareness of your unique thoughts, memories, feelings, sensations, and environments. It is perception of something of internal or external existence. Consciousness may be considered the most important unsolved problem in science. In the University of Arizona, they say that the Center for Consciousness Studies is a unique institution whose aim is to bring together the perspectives of philosophy, the cognitive sciences, neuroscience, the social sciences, medicine, and physical sciences, the arts and humanities, to move toward an integrated understanding of human consciousness. The center is unique in its broad spectrum approach. Other groups tend to focus on either cognitive neuroscience, philosophy, or purely phenomenal experimental approaches, whereas the center not only integrates these areas, but thinks outside the box of conventional wisdom, which has thus far at least failed to make significant breakthroughs. So this shows that consciousness studies is being taken seriously on an institutional level. These are some actual universities who have either a whole concentration or an entire center within the college, or a major within undergrad, master, and PhD programs that are all studying consciousness studies. And you can also see how it's a very interdisciplinary field right now, because the nature of consciousness is that consciousness affects everything that we do, not just one avenue of life. So what is consciousness? Well, the truth is that consciousness is super hard to define, and many places who are committed to materialistic approaches will say consciousness is a phenomena coming from the brain, electrical impulses, and that's it. People who are exploring other approaches besides the material approach, they'll have a different description. So first I wanted to show you one approach that this online journal took. So this is called Frontiers in Psychology, a map of consciousness studies, questions and approaches from Takuya Nikawa. She's a faculty of humanities and human sciences at Hokkaido University in Japan. And I believe she's writing this paper as a part of work that she's doing with this institute in France. So here in the introduction, she just mentions how how in-depth it is just to try to lay out a map of how to talk about consciousness, not even come up with some kind of concise definition. That hasn't been done yet. But this whole paper here is just how to talk about consciousness in a way which doesn't limit all the approaches that people are taking towards it, but gives some kind of guide for people who don't know anything about it. So the main part I wanted to show you here was what they call approaches to the definitional question. Let us start with the definitional question. How should we define the term consciousness and its cognates? There are two approaches to the definitional question. One is example-based approach, and two is essence-based approach. The example-based approach defines the term consciousness as something that is shared by typical examples of conscious states or experiences, such as pain experience and visual experience. This approach can provide a theoretically neutral definition of consciousness, since it does not refer to any distinctive property in the definition of the term consciousness. The problem of the example-based approach is that it is unclear how we should determine the scope of typical examples of conscious experiences. If we restrict the typical examples of conscious experiences to narrowly, borderline cases of consciousness, such as dreamless sleep and vegetative states, may be automatically excluded from consciousness studies. However, it is controversial whether dreamless sleep and vegetative states are conscious states. The essence-based approach defines the term consciousness by referring to its essential property, such as phenomenality, or what it is likeness. The property of being inner, qualitative, and subjective, and being accurately reportable. The merit of this approach is that it can provide an informative definition of the term consciousness. Its problem is that it's highly controversial what property we should count as a definitional property of consciousness. There may be no single property that all the conscious researchers accept to be essential for consciousness. Thus, the essence-based approach may cause a dispute over the correct definition of consciousness. This dispute can be resolved if we take a pluralist position about the definition of consciousness, allowing that there are several different notions of consciousness, defined in different manners, such as phenomenal consciousness and access consciousness. However, meta-level questions arise for the pluralists. What relation holds between those notions of consciousness? Are they different aspects of a single phenomenon, or do they refer to different phenomena? So this whole approach of trying to define consciousness ultimately is so we can figure out how to fit it into our current worldview. So the tendency of modernity, the modern times, is to break something down, right, to its simplest parts, to its most easily explainable or observable aspects. Understand that, and then you understand the whole thing, and you can fit it into your picture of how things work. But the main thing about consciousness is that it lies outside of that whole process. That whole process is occurring within consciousness. So, the smaller thing can't make a claim on the larger thing. And so we need to first understand what is actually the point of trying to understand consciousness. Is it just to fit it into the empirical scientific explanation that we have of the world? Or is it because understanding consciousness will help us to live life in a different way, with better understanding of the reality that we're participating in, and whether we can articulate that, in 100 words or less or not, might not matter so much. But if we can understand the essence of what consciousness is, what it implies, and we can then apply that essential understanding to our life, then that, in my humble opinion, is the main thing. So from the Vedic perspective, we'll get to that in a second, actually. So there's also a journal of consciousness studies that talks about many different perspectives, which is nice, not just material perspectives. The main questions that they try to examine are: how does the mind relate to the brain? can computers ever be conscious? And what do we mean by subjectivity in the self? So that first question basically goes back to the Cartesian petition, when René Descartes said that mind, res cogitans, and matter, res extensa, that which is extended in space, that they are not related to each other at all, that there is a harsh difference between the two, that they're not connected. And so that has led to this approach to understanding reality that empirical science takes, which has led us to think that matter is fundamental, that the material world, these things that are extended in space, that's what res extensa means. Matter means that which is extended in space. So we think that matter is fundamental and that everything is being dictated by matter. This has led to the thought that consciousness itself, that which is conscious of this conversation, conscious of the brain, conscious of the body, conscious of these, everything. So they've reduced that consciousness to the brain. It's electrical impulse in the brain. That's something that they can measure. They can't even prove that, but that's what they say, that the consciousness is just an electrical impulse in the brain. Where in the brain, we have to figure that out. And that's the mainstream materialistic approach. But we're saying that matter is not fundamental. Matter is only an object within consciousness. Consciousness is there before the object, before the material objects are there. Consciousness precedes that. So the relation between the mind and brain, between mind and body, is not as harsh of a separation as Descartes originally presented and as modern science still holds, that mind and matter are actually connected, no doubt. The mind and brain are connected, but the cognition, the more subtle, right? Matter is very gross, and mind, cognition is subtle. So the subtle thing is actually the higher principle. And the more that we go in the direction of the subtle principle, the more we come closer to what is spirit, what is the animating force behind everything that we see in nature, what is life. So for this first question here, we would say that matter and mind are related, but actually mind has the dominant position. Then can computers ever be conscious? Well, that can just become like a political question. If you define consciousness in a favorable way, then you can just say yes, sure. But if you understand that consciousness is only associated with living things, and that computers are objects created by living things, then of course the actual consciousness, that property that is within living things, can never be a property of the computer itself. The computer can only represent the conscious activity of the programmer. Amanda, you got something to say?
That would be until computers were to have some form of autonomy, if they did, right? So
what do you mean by that? Like making themselves?
They make their own choices.
So
it's like, would you consider at that point that the computer has become conscious of itself because it can make its own decisions based on its own will?
Well, would it be will that the computer has from its own existence, or because the coder put the code for something that seems like will?
Well, maybe we have a code that drives our will that we don't know about. And that's I think what I'm getting at is, if we have since mind precedes matter, I mean, it's such an abstract idea, concept, but if we're far along enough in our own code, maybe that's just history repeating itself eventually. I don't know if that makes sense.
Some other yeah,
Alex, go ahead.
Were you finished,
You're
Amanda?
muted.
You're muted.
I want to hear what he has to add there.
Okay.
You're muted, Alex.
All right, cool. Damn. I was just gonna say that I was gonna make the comment that I think that consciousness, and I think this is what Krishna was saying, is like consciousness does not come from matter. Matter is essentially the coloring of consciousness, or matter is the coloring of consciousness. It comes from consciousness. So anything inside consciousness can't be consciousness, is essentially what they're saying, I think. So
Yeah, that makes sense, and I agree with that. My question was just that if AI got far enough to kind of take over its own construction, its own code, and have its own free will, I mean, kind of in a way, in a sense that we may have been constructed that way.
yeah,
But
totally
that's
understand.
like maybe it is very abstract to think about, and it's almost overwhelming for me to even
And
ask.
I feel like that's something you can't really experience, so it's not ever going to have that evidence base behind it. But
Yeah.
consciousness is something that you can experience, and it's something that you experience every single day, even right now. And when you come back to that realization, that's what they mean by enlightenment, or it's just an understanding that you are consciousness and that you are aware all the time, and that everything inside of you is just essentially like just the coloring of your consciousness, is what I was trying to just say. But I'm not sure if I'm right. This is just what I've read,
I
and
like that.
yeah.
If I can add something in here, so I haven't done like really in-depth research into like the literature and kind of current definitions of consciousness. I mean, having questions like these like kind of highlight the importance of having some sort of, even if we come up with more words than just consciousness, instead of trying to squeeze everything into consciousness, have like worry about like sub definitions of consciousness. But from my own kind of thoughts and observations and just thinking about things in the way of consciousness having overlap with just all around awareness, because I mean, if you think if I'm conscious of things that are affecting my physical body, and then if I'm conscious of that, then I make changes to it which are favorable to me, like almost making me in a more homeostatic manner. If I'm conscious of heat on my hand, I'm going to pull away from that sensation because it's not beneficial to me there. And then consciousness of like abiotic things that are like computers or physical matter that does not have like a typical attachment to what is living life to it, such as like a river, water, or rocks. I think of it might be more so I'm speaking of like adaptive awareness, but then also could that be like a subgroup of consciousness? But if you think about if a tree was to fall in the middle of a river, and that river has enough awareness to then divert its water outwards so it doesn't pool up in that one area. It's almost like awareness of a just how I felt the heat, so I pulled away. The river feels the blockage, so it diverts its flow. So I mean, that enough, like I mean, passive intelligence maybe could be obtainable by something more physically developed, like a computer. And I might be like overlapping a couple different ideas, but I'm just trying to pull some sense out of this question, tying in conscious and awareness to non-living things.
Taylor,
I don't have anything specific to add to that, but I just thought that was a really good point, and like I didn't even think of it that way. So that's really cool.
Even though the river is alive, right?
See, now I can trace back the first time I had this idea when I was in Vermont and looking at a waterfall and seeing, like, thinking about how adaptive the water is in itself and how it is able to make changes to its own flow, to its own behavior based off of external or like actions or different things going on around it. I'm like, well, that's kind of like what I do. Like if I am cold, if I'm kind of like aware and conscious of me being cold, I button up my flannel. So I don't
That's
know.
a really good example. I think you painted a great example there.
Yeah, I mean that's my subjective
like
view.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off there.
I lost my train of thought.
See,
It's all good.
I'm aware and I'm conscious that that's a problem of mine, and I actively try to correct it.
I think one determining characteristic of at least human consciousness that we can talk about is self-consciousness or self-awareness. And that capacity doesn't seem to be there so much in other forms of life, although it might be there in certain degrees. And then with matter, things that we call matter, at least, like, is a river alive, or is a river bending around a tree that fell the same thing as me pulling my hand away from a fire? I think it's definitely interesting to talk about, because many ancient cultures saw and see the entire natural world, that there's life behind the entire natural world, even the rivers, even the grass, even the earth, things that we call inert. Ancient cultures saw that life was there also. But in today's thinking, we would call the earth and even water, we would call that matter. And I definitely can't give any definitive kind of remark about that, but I would point out that when a river is going around water, it's following the law of gravity, like it's following the physical law. And when I pull my hand away from fire, there's no physical law that's necessarily making me do that. I just don't want to burn my hand off. I could decide not to do that, and my hand could just burn. But could the river decide not to go over the log? I don't know. I don't think, I would say that I don't think the water could decide to do that. But if other environmental factors played a role, and somehow the velocity of the water rushing increased, then could it just go right through the tree? Maybe, but again, that's just following physical laws. And I think that is different than the conscious or immediate reaction, which is still the conscious activity of pulling your hand away from a fire. And trying to bring it back to the computer. The computer, and what can I say? The computer is always too far, but it's always a result of something that's alive. The computer is just a representation. Any function that a computer plays is just a presentation, is just a representation of what the conscious living being put into it. And it could never go beyond that, because free will is something that's inherent in things that are alive. Like we gave the example one time of a bird. You open your hand, you have a bird in it, you open your hand and the bird will fly wherever it wants to go. But when you take a rock and you throw the rock, you can measure where it's going to go based on physics and so many other things. So life has this capacity for spontaneous activity. And that's what freedom is. That's what free will is, the capacity for spontaneous activity. And does a machine have that capacity?
Well, in on the topic of the evolution of consciousness, if you're talking about us being an image of God, I mean, that kind of plays into that, you know? I mean, I think that AI having autonomy is too far in the future. Like, we still have so many discoveries to make, research to do on human consciousness and harmonizing, you know, the spirituality and philosophy with science. But I think eventually it could lead that way, in the same sense that I think that we are representations of a higher consciousness of God, that we can't, it's inconceivable. But that's
So
that's all I don't know.
I got like kind of like two or three things floating around in my head that I want to try pulling out before they float away. One thing I think that's like a very respectful, like, I guess, rebuttal, or kind of to what I was saying about the river. And I appreciate that, and the seeing physical physical things adapting to a external force acting upon it. That's like the fundamentals of physics. And like you said, there are laws of physics, mathematical equations, the language of math that can explain the parameters that physical things are allowed to operate within these mathematical laws. I don't have too much in-depth knowledge of it so far, but in a marine geology class I have right now, we were talking about the randomness of turbulent flow. So there's like certain flow of physical objects that are of randomness that cannot be necessarily predicted, which is kind of tricky. And from what I know, it's a kind of like a front of physics that is being discovered, because turbulent flow is kind of it's not necessarily following direct laws of mathematics. Like I said, I have a vague understanding. That's like one of the first things that pops in my head as for you talking about the randomness of living things and what they do. The bird flying out of the hand example. And the second part of this is what I was thinking about, is as I talk about the parameters of mathematics and physics. And then it makes me think, so what are the parameters of our own consciousness? So is the mind limitless? Or how, Amanda, I believe, I forget exactly the words you said, but if our consciousness is a depiction of God, what parameters of our mind has God put in place for us as a, if you will, a creation of whatever that higher power is?
I think some of this might be discussed more in some of the next slides based on these things that you're bringing up. And unless anyone else has any more comments they'd like to add, and they're free to do so, you can move to the next slide.
Okay, I've got off what I wanted to say.
So, consciousness is the symptom of the soul. Consciousness is the symptom of the soul. Even if one does not find the soul within the heart where he is situated, one can still understand the presence of the soul simply by the presence of consciousness. Sometimes we do not find the sun in the sky owing to the clouds or for some other reason, but the light of the sun is always there, and we are convinced that it is there for daytime. As soon as there is a little light in the sky early in the morning, we can understand that the sun is in the sky. Similarly, since there is some consciousness in all bodies, whether man or animal, we can understand the presence of the soul. This consciousness of the soul is, however, different from the consciousness of the Supreme, because the Supreme Consciousness is all knowledge, past, present, and future. The consciousness of the individual soul is prone to be forgetful. When he is forgetful of his real nature, he obtains education and enlightenment from the superior lessons of Krishna. This was written by Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada in his commentary or purport to Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, text 20. So we've talked about the example before that in the Vedic conception, the soul is likened to the sun orb, the orb of the sun, and the rays of the sun that emit from that orb that come and illuminate the world and other planets, that is compared to the consciousness. So that the soul has the primary position and consciousness is emanating from that. But whenever the soul is present, consciousness is also present. Just like the sun rays are there's a one-way relation to the orb, that the rays are emanating from the orb. Right? It's not that the orb is somehow reliant on the rays, but specifically the rays are dependent on the orb. Yet, whenever the orb is present, the rays are also present. And vice versa. If the rays are present, the orb is also present. So that last example was likening consciousness, the presence of consciousness, to the rays of the sun. And since we see the rays of the sun, we know that the sun orb is there, the source of those rays. So because consciousness is there, we know that the living entity, the soul, is also there. Even though we can't see the soul with our eyes, we can't see consciousness with any of our five senses, but we understand consciousness is there, and the consciousness is coming from some source, from something, from some life, because consciousness is only present when life is there. So in this way, that metaphor is made, and I think it's helpful. Another example in the Vedic literature that's given to illustrate the relationship between our five senses, which are the gross senses and then subtle senses. In the Vedic conception, there's a difference between intelligence, the mind, and the ego, and those are all considered subtle senses, and how those 7 things relate to the soul. So it is said by the wise that the senses are superior to matter. The mind is superior to the senses, and the intelligence is superior to the mind, and the soul is superior to even the intelligence. So this is Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, text 42. And then from the Katha Upanishad, it says that the individual is the passenger in the car of the material body. The intelligence is the driver. Mind is the driving instrument, and the senses are the horses. The self is thus the enjoyer or sufferer in the association of the mind and senses. So it is understood by great thinkers. So the Vedic conception of reality says that the soul is constitutionally a part of God, the super soul. But the soul has free will to either choose to cultivate a holistic relation with reality, meaning a relationship with its source, with God, or the individual soul has the capacity to use its freedom to exploit the environment and serve its own desires, sense gratification, etc. So when we choose to live in a self-centered way, meaning we are trying to exploit our senses, exploit the environment for our own gratification in an isolated manner, in a manner that isn't serving the whole or participating in the whole reality inclusive of spirit. When we're not living like that, it's said to be in the material world, material consciousness. So this nice metaphor is given to show how powerful the senses can become in misdirecting the consciousness when it is not directed towards spirit. So it said here that the senses are higher than matter, right? We can understand that there are objects outside of the senses, we can say, and that our senses perceive them. Our senses perceive the things that are external to the senses. And then our mind is driving the senses. Oh, I want this, I don't want that. And that can come in any of the form of the five senses, right? I want that taste, I don't want that taste. I want that sound, I don't want that sound, etc. And then the intelligence is there discriminating. Oh, I don't want that because. Oh, I want that because. For some higher reasoning, some higher discernment is there. And then the ego, which isn't mentioned here, the ego would be how I relate to those things. My identity is as so-and-so, whether it's racial identity, political identity, gender identity, sexual orientation identity, all of these elements that we identify with that relate to our body, and they create how we perceive ourselves. So when we perceive ourselves in relation to the body, and then we interact with our environment through our senses in a way that aligns with how we identify with ourselves. I see myself as so-and-so, so I want to do this, I don't want to do that. I want to go in this direction and I don't want to go in that direction. So the ego is the primary source of how our external reality will manifest. So when the ego can identify with the soul, which is even above the intelligence, as it says in here, when we identify as this soul that is not the condition of the material body, but in the Vedic conception has been through many different bodies, man, woman, different ethnicities, different everything. In the Vedic conception, in our past lives, we have gone through so many different circumstances, and the conditions of our present life are the reactions of those circumstances. So the recommendation is that if we can relate to our soul as our identity, that spiritual being, which is eternal and has eternal relation with the larger spirit, with God, with the totality, the organic whole, then we start to move in a different direction, away from material consciousness towards spiritual consciousness. But there is a progression, and that progression is outlined in the Vedic knowledge, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Yeah, Taylor.
I'm glad this slide came after what we're just talking about, because it just like kind of sinking in, looking at that picture, kind of gives and the separation between sense to mind to intelligence, and then intelligence to the superior of the soul. Kind of the example I had about heat on my hand, if you look at the white horse, where black horse seems to be is the ear, it seems to be experiencing something, I would say, unfavorable to the horse, and then the individual or the ego or the person, like the woman in the blue dress, she's therefore getting a reaction based off of the that unfavorable sense. And I guess you say that reaction would be like the mind. If the mind is the thing that's saying, I don't like my hand being that hot, and giving a negative reaction to that. And then if above the mind is the intelligence, that to me, that's evidence that there has to be something above the mind in the favorable of like the physical senses, because how can somebody, like you said, sit through that and allow their hand to burn if it's a counter, like if it's not what the mind would like. I don't know. So I mean, that this just like laying this out in this format kind of painted that a little more clear, and I want to bring back in kind of proving my other point, proving the wrongness of my other one point I was saying. So does physical things, does it cap out at the mind, or does it go to that next step like we can as living things?
Well, I think we have that free will to decide how we interact with the physical environment. We're not just strictly dictated by the physical laws. So if there is some purpose that we've deemed worthy for keeping our hand in that fire, right, some kind of sacrifice or austerity or, whatever there might be, and of course this is all metaphorical, but if there's some reason that we have, then that free will is coming from the soul. That free will isn't coming from the senses or the mind or the intelligence or the ego. That free will, that capacity for spontaneous activity, is something inherent at the level of the soul, because that's that freedom, the capacity of freedom and spontaneous activity is actually the root of the connection with God. So coming back to the material sphere, that free will, since it's on the level of the soul, it can control the intelligence, the mind, the ego. Not control, but it can influence, have a strong influence on the mind, the intelligence, and the senses. That if you want to keep your hand in the burning fire, even though it doesn't feel good, you can do that. You have that capacity to override all those material senses, the gross senses and the subtle senses. That freedom is above all that. It's in the soul. So if you want to keep your hand in the fire, if you want to do something which goes against the physical law to some capacity, right? To some capacity, you can do that.
I like that you added, if you don't mind me adding to this, I like that you added the ego into there, because if the mind operates, if the mind is making decisions based off the physical, the senses, of things around it, and the ego is operating off of what's beneficial to the perceived self and how it's seen in relation to other things around it. So, I mean, it's like I said, it's metaphorical, but if there was some sort of like social benefit or some sort of benefit to the ego by keeping the hand in the fire, then it's the ego making the decision to counter the desires of the mind or the physical, however. And I mean that just goes down.
Well, wouldn't it be the id, the soul, the id? At that point, that's what Kashavadas was kind of saying. It's because that's where matter is separated. Mind and matter is separated.
I guess it would be, because it
like choosing, if you had a motive, the motivation to keep the hand in the fire.
I guess
because there was a benefit.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the most interesting part about this is that no matter what experience you have, there's always something that's aware of it. Something that's aware of the ego. There's something that's aware of the thoughts, something that's aware of the intelligence. And I think that awareness itself is the embodiment of consciousness. And that's something that we always see and always experience, or not see with the eyes, but know, because that's our lived experience. But all of these components of life arise within consciousness. And I really think that's a beautiful thing to think about. That's just my thought.
I like that slide. The last one we were talking.
Yeah, this is all very important to talk about and to consider. This is stuff that most people either don't place any importance on or don't even have the opportunity to think about and discuss, let alone, by themselves, but especially in a group setting. So that's what this club is for. It's supposed to be an opportunity to consider these things. They're important. So, it's awesome that all you guys are here and taking it seriously, for real.
I don't want to.
I want to add. Oh.
Go get it.
Okay, I'll be brief. I want to add that, like, if I do ask questions or if I add any comments, it's really it's just really cool to be able to to discuss these topics and these things in relation to one another: psychology, philosophy, spirituality, neuroscience, biology, all that. Because I sit with all of my books by myself, just passionately reading about this stuff all the time, but I don't, to be able to discuss it and, get all of our thoughts and feelings about things and opinions and our knowledge, bringing it in to the discussions, like, that's why, I hope that, you guys continue to come and we can just, even if the conversation leads to just nowhere, really, it's exciting for me to just be able to learn from you guys and be able to share these thoughts.
Absolutely.
And this
I agree.
knowledge.
This being my first meeting here, a little background. I know it was said before, but I'm an oceanography major, so that has a lot. That's really the physical science, and it was my freshman year of college where I had a really good mathematics professor who really kind of instilled the appreciation for mathematics. And it's a story for another time, but the debate between a lot of mathematicians and people that see the world strictly in a physical matter, they say that that's evidence to disprove the existence of God. But for me, I've had a really profound different experience with that. By understanding the laws of nature and stuff, it kind of brought me closer to to that feeling, that sense of God, and so I mean, that's a little how I'm where I guess if we all have our different, some people see it in a philosophical, some see it in a anthropology, some see it in biological, all these topics and stuff, which I have with myself a lot. There's very few people I can really lay this conversation on to.
I agree.
I have that problem sometimes. I meet somebody new and then I'm
Amen, bro.
I'm too much to handle for a casual conversation in the hallway. But
Same.
But no,
Struggle.
I again, I appreciate the community aspect of this.
We're happy you're here.
Thank you.
Totally, man. Totally. I think it's awesome. I think it's just awesome now we're all here. We have this devotion to trying to figure out what's going on. I'm just so confused at what life is and trying to just put myself in this place, try to fit myself into life. And I do it all the time, every day. It's constantly on my mind. And then we might come here and we might say some stuff that might sound stupid, but nothing is off the table. Just, I feel like if you're just open and you let your thoughts out, you start to be able to piece everything together. And I think that's part of the whole process. It is a process of understanding. It's not just a realization at one point.
And bringing it all cohesively in
100%.
our own minds.
I don't want to hold too long, but what I've already kind of learned or had a sense of share, one of the first times, besides with a few people in my life, being able to share this conversation with us, the importance of not being attached to my initial ideas or thoughts. And being okay with accepting and kind of really appreciating counter evidence, I'm bringing it back to my example with the fire, not being attached to that and stuff. And I don't know. This is good for me. I don't want to hold stuff too much.
That's a great quality that's a beautiful quality to have, especially in this stuff. So I appreciate that humility. Definitely.
Well, I can actually, in this Shabbadas, I brought my book for this meeting. This is Idols of the Mind versus True Reality, guys. And this was written by B.M. Puri, Dr. B.M. Puri, who is the, is he the current president of BVISCS?
Yes, he's our serving director and one of the original founding members of the institute, which was established back in '76.
So I grabbed this book. If any of you are interested in grabbing it on the website, I spoke to Shavadas about maybe next semester getting a few of these to sell for members at like maybe a discounted rate. But what you were saying, Taylor, is basically like right on the first page of the preface of the book. The Empyre quotes Francis Bacon, and do you mind if I read this first paragraph?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So it says here, Francis Bacon placed the idea of idols of the mind at the root of what would become modern science. He had a clear understanding of the limitations of the finite human mind and intellect, and that any endeavor for scientific knowledge must begin with acknowledging that limitation. So,
Love it.
right, basically what you're saying right there.
Totally agree.
Reminded me of that. I'm trying to read the first like 30 pages over and over again. I just connect it, bring it to a cohesive explanation if somebody asks me about it. Because it can get kind of complicated as as this presentation is making an example of, is that the interconnectedness of consciousness studies and the interdisciplinary nature of it makes discussing it briefly complicated.
I just read this book recently. You can find him on YouTube. His name is Rupert Spira. I'm not sure if you might have heard of him before, but he teaches about this way of thinking. And there's this book I just read called The Nature of Consciousness. And my life was already changed before that, but it changed it even further. And I didn't even think it was possible. But I can link it real fast if you guys want to take a look at that, just in case. Or I can put it in the Discord or whatever. But I love that book,
Yeah,
man.
do that.
So yeah, I'll link that.
Share it on the Discord if you can. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just get some life in there.
Exactly.
One point that we'll go over with the last couple of slides, commenting on what Amanda said, is that the reason I think consciousness studies is so interdisciplinary is because when we're perceiving reality as a whole, as an organic whole, then anytime we try to isolate an individual aspect of a whole and just completely absorb ourselves in that isolated part without considering how it is related to the whole, then we're only going to have a very abstract understanding of that thing, because the fundamental aspect of that part is that it is participating in the whole, and that whole is where it derives its meaning and purpose. So, and we'll talk about that just in a couple more slides. But that's a part of the development of consciousness, is developing from matter to spirit. The German philosopher G.W. of Hegel has a book called The Phenomenology of Spirit. A lot of what we are presenting is founded not only in the Vedic knowledge, but also this wisdom that Hegel and the line of thought that Hegel is participating in from Plato and Aristotle that talks about this development of consciousness. So in his book, Phenomenology of Spirit, Hegel talks about the process, the development of consciousness of spirit coming to know itself as spirit. So, and that whole process, is life, is our life. So,
yeah, just to add really quick to what you're saying, because you brought up Hegel, if you guys didn't see the resources that were added to the Discord, the one website on Hegel's works, I highly recommend you go on there and just spend some time there reading through it. I even linked it to my linker tree on Instagram because I think everyone should read it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm familiar with some of Hegel. after taking philosophy with Keshavardas. Like, he talked a lot about it, so I obviously had to look into it.
Yeah.
So,
We had fun last semester, huh?
oh, we did. It was great. I actually learned so much, and I feel a lot of this this passion to like learn about myself and stuff, which I've always had, but it was really great.
I have philosophy next semester for the first time, and I've been waiting for an opportunity for in my college career for my schedule to open up where I can take a philosophy class,
Nice.
and I'm excited for it. I'm nervous for my roommates.
Dude, I get it.
And their own time.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Who do you have with philosophy class?
I'm
Yeah, is
not.
it an intro or?
There's no prerequisites, so but I believe it's about logic.
Hey, I'm taking that too.
Symbolic logic?
I think symbolic logic, yes.
We may be in the same class then.
Wonderful.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Well, maybe we can save our friends' ears, and we can. I'm sure I could bring this. This will be my outlet to
Yeah, for sure.
to depressurize what goes on in my head. That's the way
We're
I
gonna have to.
Yeah.
I remember, I don't know if you, Alex and Shavadas, like felt like your mind was just being like rung up, and I took introduction to philosophy, but it felt like my mind was just being like wrung out, like
I loved it.
a dirty t-shirt or something.
It's such
It was hard.
that feeling is I don't know, it's so necessary for me, because if I don't have times when I haven't been surrounded by people that are accepting of conversation like this, it's
To help you digest it a little bit.
It's literally
Yeah.
felt like internal pressure in the head that needs to be pressurized.
Yeah. It's just like the calling to it is like an internal calling. If you like kind of investigate that sensation that you have in your head, I also feel that as well. Like, it's just this wanting to just express or find out what's going on. And I feel like that's kind of like one of the things I think that the soul kind of does to you. It really tries to push you out into that experience of like trying to figure out what's going on, I think. So
Use the
really,
Discord, Taylor, and
yeah, for sure.
There's going to be a channel there where you can just like just put whatever down there. Any
just
thoughts,
like add everything. I'll hop in for sure and like just talk. I'm always down.
I might sound out there sometimes, so I'm just putting that out there now. But
All good.
if I'm doing some research, maybe I'll just start. If you guys don't have the courage to start it,
Just do it.
Maybe drop a few paragraphs. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Taylor, Alex, Lydia, Keshavardas, if you want to, share any findings or thoughts about this stuff, do it on the Discord.
Lydia, are you still there?
She had to leave.
She had to
Put it in
leave.
the chat.
Oh, really? She's not. I don't have the gallery view. You see that?
3 planes.
So, yeah. Now, this just kind of lays out the different capacities that the soul has for experiencing reality. And the first 3 that we'll talk about are the 3 different planes of consciousness. And the first one we basically talked about already, exploitation, where
I love that.
we're trying to serve our own self-interest. We're just trying to exploit the environment for our own sense gratification. And we're not trying to develop consciousness in the direction of spirit, in the direction of a holistic reality and how we fit into that. But so within that plane of exploitation, a lot of suffering can be there and reward. It's this plane of karma where either we're going to do something and get a punishment for it or a reward for it. And some people would like to just completely withdraw from that whole process, and that's called renunciation, the second plane of consciousness. They recognize that it's very illusory. This either, you do something and you get a positive reward or a negative punishment for it, and you're just caught up in this duality of good and bad. And they recognize it to the degree where they don't want that anymore, so they try to pull away from it, and that's renunciation. But pulling away from that is still completely based in a self-centered conception. They're trying to get the highest degree of fulfillment, and they're thinking for themselves, the highest degree of fulfillment in their isolated sense of self. And they think the best way to do that is to just renounce the world, renounce everything, and that's it. But higher than that is the plane of dedication, where we recognize that everything that we find around us in the environment, including our own body, our own thoughts, everything, can be utilized in a positive direction for spiritual advancement, for the positive development of our consciousness. So that is the plane that the Vedas conclude is the best to live our lives within. How to learn, how to cultivate our actions and our thoughts and our deeds, all within the plane of dedication. How to positively progress towards that identity of ourself as the spirit soul, the eternal spirit soul. So then there are 4 states of the soul, states of consciousness: waking, sleeping, and deep sleep, which is like a dreaming state. Those first 3 are pretty direct, pretty obvious. Waking, sleeping, and then this deep sleep, this dream state. And then above this deep sleep, this dream state, is this pure consciousness. That means that we're finally engaged in the plane of dedication. And within that plane of dedication, because we talked about this during the Vedic wisdom presentation last time, which is on YouTube, that the spiritual world is the actuality of this world. The material world is seen as a reflection or the shadow of the spiritual world. So everything that we experience here is a reflection of the real thing. It's only here because it's a reflection of the real thing in the spiritual world. And when you say the real thing in the spiritual world, it means it's in its relationship to the whole. When something we're saying is real in the spiritual world, that thing is being manifested in its full capacity as it relates to the organic whole, to God, to spirit. Here in the material world, in the shadow of that, everything seems to be isolated, not related to other things. But that's just because it's a shadow. And we can understand that this world is moving, just like a reflection is moving when you're waving your hand in front of a mirror. But is the reflection moving on its own, or is it reflecting the real thing? Right? The movement of the reflection is only reliant or dependent on the real thing. So the idea is to try to learn about that which is the full conception of reality, the spiritual reality. And that's what
looking glass.
Yes. And that's what pure consciousness is, relating to that spiritual reality. And there are levels in that spiritual plane. There are different moods, so to speak. And that Turyatita, that 5th state of the soul, is the highest mood or state of consciousness, even in the spiritual plane. So the last 2, pure consciousness, which is called Turiya and Turyatita, they're different from each other, but they're both in the spiritual plane. And then you have these 5 types of knowledge, which towards the end correspond to the 4 states of the soul. The first is called Prajyaksha. It means sense experience. You gain knowledge through observing your environment with your senses. This is number 1, and number 5 is the most progressive, by the way. So it's like a positive development as we go down this list. The most unreliable method of obtaining knowledge to the most reliable way of obtaining knowledge. So 1 is Prajyaksha, our own direct sense experience. That's in the Vedic conception, that's at the lowest, because, when you're far away from a tree, the tree looks like this, and then you come close and it's not that small. When we look at the sun, we think the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. We think the sun is moving across the sky like that, but really the earth is rotating. So our senses aren't so perfect. They don't actually tell us what reality is. Then Parochia is the next type of way for acquiring knowledge. That is hearing from someone who knows better. So that, is the whole process of education, right? You hear from a teacher who has heard from a teacher. So it's a more reliable way of obtaining knowledge. You're learning from somebody who actually knows. And then this Parochia. This is now related to this deep sleep, this hazy sense of consciousness, where you're starting to approach the transcendental platform, the spiritual platform, but it's very hazy. It's not very distinguishable. And then that leads us to the fourth plane, Adhokshaja, where we can understand now that we are not the body, that matter is not the active principle in the world, that life and spirit is the active principle, and we are participating within a spiritual reality. That type of knowledge is called Adhokshaja. And then finally, the highest is called Prakrita. Prakrita actually means nature. And Prakrita is the negation of nature. So this highest sense of knowledge, of knowing reality, is actually such that you don't even distinguish between spirit or matter. You're not thinking like that. You're so absorbed in the dynamic, sweet, loving play of reality, so completely absorbed in that you're not even trying to make these kind of distinctions. You're just wholeheartedly, everything is just completely engaged in this spiritual activity. And that's the highest way of interacting within reality and coming to know about reality. And this is what we find in the Vedas, but this is not something to be taken, like lightly at all. That Prakrita is not like something that is just achieved by our own effort or anything like that. The whole development of consciousness is not just something happening from our side. It's when we understand that we are participants in a conscious living reality that is beyond ourself, then our will, our isolated individual will, is not the only factor. There are other factors that are far beyond our will, and our development, our spiritual development, is much dependent upon what is beyond our own will.
So divine intervention.
Yeah, we could say it like that.
I walk, every step I take, I feel that. Like that's the goal, right? For that highest plane of the soul.
Well,
Like that is the reality of it in a material sense.
Well, the Vedic conception would say that the reality of it is not a material sense at all. The reality of it would be to completely move beyond the material conception, which is just a misconception.
But being able to sense that force that is immaterial upon the material, that's I guess what my question was, like being able to sense the divine with you everywhere you go.
That would be, that would be a starting point, would just be to understand that everything is spirit in a differentiated way. Everything is a unity in difference, and that is all spirit, and being aware of that, and then learning how to operate within that kind of reality properly would be the goal. So just that recognition is beautiful to attain, first of all, but that would be the starting point. Now we recognize that we are not matter, we're spirit, and then life begins, to some extent.
That's how it feels like life begins.
Yeah.
Every step.
Yeah.
Every step that is taken
Mm-hmm.
in that perspective. Sorry, Alex, go.
No, it's all good. I was just going to say, I was really, really deep into a meditation the other day. And I literally felt myself as a child, like a child that was just born, who had no conception of the room, like what things were, because they had no names for anything. And I was in this state of unknowingness, but yet awareness. And it was something else. And then as soon as I started to attach my mind to it, I left it. And it's been like the last week, actually, it's been just me trying to get back there. But the more I try, I feel like the less I achieve.
The
That was just
feeling?
uh-huh. I don't know if I could even like it's something I couldn't even put into words, but I don't know if you've had an experience like when you were really young where you just had the experience of you starting life and like you're starting to become aware of your body. Like I have a very early memory of when I was like 2 years old and I like came out of the cradle or whatever the heck I was in. My babysitter was like looking at me and I still remember that to this day and I have the feeling of it and I like mimicked that and it felt like amazing and it felt so peaceful. So it felt like I was invincible, like nothing could touch me or it was amazing. I don't know. I just wanted to vent.
Would you kind of relate
I
that?
relate to
So
that, right?
a term, so to that level, I haven't experienced that, but I've tried implementing a technique which I've heard of beginner's mind, to that nature, which from my understanding basically is the like within a meditative practice observing different impulses and would be feelings of grounding, feel like, or smells or any of these senses as something which is completely new. So like the
Yeah. Hmm.
as
It reminds me of I did a 10-day meditation, Vipassana meditation or Vipassana meditation retreat. And it was just focusing on the sensations of the body. And it's like a structured plan. They have like first 2 days you do something, then they switch up like the regimen and you have to like, I don't know, they guide you through it. And that really has led me to like, I feel like body awareness and meditation is like a trigger for me. So when I was thinking of like being a baby, I don't know why, but like it just helped me get to that point of like we were talking about deeper spiritual understanding, and I felt like I was getting there. But the point, which is kind of frustrating, I don't want to like take too much time up, but I feel like when you get to that point, your ego really tries to attach to it. Like, I am this now. I've had this experience, and then you want to talk about it. And then once you talk about it, the experience just loses all its meaning because I really don't, I couldn't put it into words. And even now, I'm like, it's drifting away from me. I know it's kind of a weird thing to say, but
Because it's like a memory in a way that is real. It was real
yeah,
for you.
it was an
But you
experience of just
weren't,
being like alive. I couldn't
yeah,
explain it better. Yeah,
it was like an essence of feeling that is not
yeah.
explainable.
I
I understand.
Yeah, go ahead.
one thing
No,
I
I
was
I understand.
when you're talking about once you put it into words and you try explaining it and that feeling how it goes away, I've kind of felt that and almost felt like the limitations of maybe just our language, but also just the experience or being able to share that, almost as if like you're witnessing a shadow and trying to show somebody that shadow by shining a light on it, and
Right.
and
Right.
which by doing so trying to show this shadow is removing what makes that experience.
Yeah,
I'll
totally.
be talking about that, and I might write down a note of exactly what you just said. But I'll be adding that to my presentation on music psychology.
Nice.
Cool.
Because music, I think, is the number one vehicle that we can use to express memories like that, that are intangible, weren't real. They weren't here. We didn't experience it here, but we experience it here and here. And a lot of times I think that, I mean, you see in all religions across time, song, you know, prayer in song is it's like literally the only way I think that we can truly like express together in the simplest way, but
Universal
in a
language.
universal, beautiful way, that connection, that feeling. You
So
can
words
lay it
to
out there.
flashlight. Words as words is to flashlight. It's just the wrong tool for sharing that.
Yeah, music is I think it's the language of the universe. I mean,
Well,
it is. We're in physics. I mean, physically, we are made of sound and vibration, right?
I'm excited for your presentation. That's a hell of a preview.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Alex.
Oh, no problem. Like, I feel comfortable now. Like, after that, I can feel like I could share anything, you know? Like,
I felt like I was there with you when you were saying it. Like,
thanks, man. Like, I feel comfortable after sharing that for sure. Like, I feel like I can share anything.
All right, sorry to interrupt.
An interruption. No interruption. This is all what we're supposed to be doing here.
Yeah.
So I skipped a couple of slides. Yeah, I'm gonna try to wrap up in the next 15 minutes. So I skipped a couple of slides just because I think it was better to continue with the talking amongst each other than, you know, try to cut it short. So hopefully I'll just be able to wrap up in the next couple 15 minutes or so, 10 minutes. So this next topic, which is not a new topic, this is what we've been talking about the whole time, is called self-determination. So this is a quote from Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev Goswami Maharaj, a Vaishnava, a practitioner of what the Vedic scriptures talk about. So he says that the only requirement is that we must develop our deeper nature, our self-identification through self-determination. In Hegel's language, self-determination is the fulfillment of all of us. Self-determination in the Vaishnava or Vedic conception means Svarup Siddhi, spiritual identity. Who am I? What is my deeper self beyond my mind or my intelligence? Where am I? What is my inner self-interest? I must enter the plane of reality. I must get back my proper self. And in Krishna's connection, I will enter the environment and see what the world really is. If I am given some wine or some poison, then I shall become beside myself. I shall see things in a distorted way. I will be unable to recognize my sister or mother, and actuated by animal nature, I will see everything as an object for my enjoyment. The crude tendency of lust will cover my vision of everything. Then again, when I am sober, I shall see the same things, but my perception of them will be changed. In this way, we must be prepared to go deeper beneath the surface of reality and find out who we are. What is our real self-interest? We should try to see the paraphernalia of reality according to our genuine self-interest. Through self-determination, we must learn to see things the opposite of the way we are seeing them at present. We must try to understand how to find ourselves, and by surrendering ourselves to Krishna's interest, then we shall try to go back home, back to Godhead. And again, this is a quote from the book pictured here, Subjective Evolution of Consciousness. I can put a link to the free PDF in the Discord once we're all on there if you'd like to take a look at it. It's very nice.
Sure.
So,
Ooh. Looks good.
Yeah. The parts are abstractions from the whole. So a part of the body or an individual person, individual consciousness, when considered in isolation, are an abstraction from the whole. If we consider the whole to be simply made up of parts, we are under misconception. The parts only arise from the whole after it comes to be. They are not constituents of it. All right, so if we try to understand a pizza based on the 6 slices that are served on a plate in front of us, you know, we're not going to have any understanding, right? The parts don't tell you anything about how the pizza came to be, about the ingredients that went into it, about nothing, right? If you just try to study the parts of something, we are not going to understand the whole. The whole has to be understood first, and then the parts in their relation to the whole can be understood properly. So mechanical metaphors and reductionist approaches miss or neglect the living dynamic unity of reality. The unity is evident within the part as its purpose, its final end, teleology. The part is integrated within the whole through its teleological relationship to the whole. Without acknowledging this teleological relation to the whole, the part cannot be properly conceived. Thus, the emphasis of modernity is on the finite individual's purposes and needs instead of the infinite whole of which the individual is an organic part. These parts are sublated in the whole. There is unity and difference. The seed is implicit in the tree. The seed produces itself. This is self-determination. So first, I'll just mention this elephant. There is a parable in the Vedic tradition of the blind men and the elephant, where these 6 blind men, they don't know that they're touching an elephant. They feel the body. And so each of the 6 of them try to feel a different part of the elephant and understand what it is that they're experiencing. So one blind man touches the body, he thinks it's a brick wall. Another one touches the trunk, he thinks it's a cobra. One touches the tusks, think it's spears. The ears feel like fans. The legs feel like wooden trunks, tree trunks, and the rope, the tail feels like a rope. They have no idea of what an elephant is beforehand, and they can't perceive that because they're blind. So they just take their individual experience of the parts isolated from the whole, and they try to understand the whole based on that. So that understanding leads to this picture of the elephant on the right. You know, this abstract thing that is nothing like what reality is of the elephant. So in the same way, this picture of reality that we have put together from modern science based on reducing everything to its most basic part, and then painting a picture based on these parts, you know, leaves a lot missing. And this is our position, and this is what we think. And specifically, this part here was given by our servant director, Shripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj. The unity is evident within the part as its purpose. And I think is perfect, because that's the part that is missing in modern science's big picture. Tells you that there is no purpose because they're starting from the parts and they don't see the whole. But when you understand that the whole comes first and that the parts play a role where they derive their meaning and identity from their relation to the whole, then you can understand purpose. And we all experience the desire to understand our purpose. So that's already evident within us. So we know that it's there. But now our whole life, we're searching for the fulfillment of that. And you know, how do we find it? You know, we have to consider the whole of the reality that we're living in before we can understand ourselves. And that's essentially it for today.
That's why so many people are hopeless. You know, you run into, and mental health crisis is on the rise.
Yeah, I was just doing, sometimes I do singing bowl meditations at assisted living facilities. And I just did one for the first time since COVID slowed down the other day. And the lady who I'm, you know, or collaborate with, who runs the assisted living facility, she told me that the restrictions of COVID, you can't be close to people, especially with old people, because they're more susceptible. So people who had dementia, they became like exponentially worse because of that isolation, because keep them away from people, that whatever that illness of the consciousness is, that dementia is, when they're isolated, then it becomes exponentially worse. So, you can understand then that to some degree, that probably also starts because of some isolation or perceived isolation in the consciousness. You see yourself as a part, an isolated part from everything. And somehow, your mind.
The loneliness takes over every cell in your body. Right?
You start to completely forget everything.
Every cell starts dying off because it's. Go ahead.
The first time I went to a concert after COVID felt absolutely like amazing, and just like the return of that kind of feeling of unity with a larger group, or something larger than me sitting in front of my computer on Zoom. I mean, even the essence of this format of communicating with others, you're seeing yourself. I'm looking at myself right now in a little box that's separated from Amanda's, that's separated from Kirsten, that's separated from Alex's. It even has my given name on there, and I for months at a time, I'm identifying with this figure in this little box, and breaking free of that and coming into actual physical and in-person interactions. It just really is, from mental health wise, unbelievably beneficial.
You appreciate face-to-face more?
Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. I'm sorry that you felt that impact of the pandemic. Same.
I mean, being aware of that and recognizing that, and that example shouldn't be taken too far, but it just kind of, I don't know, I think puts light to the beneficial properties of sharing presence with another person. And I mean, we're through our word and shared experiences and like sharing of ideas, we're obtaining probably the best Zoom conversation I've had in ever. Listen, I'm gonna be getting kicked out of here in a minute. There's a class coming.
Me too, yeah.
At 6.
All right. Hey Taylor, are you in the library?
I'll be out in a second. What was that?
Are you in the library at Stockton?
No, I'm at B Wing, maybe.
Okay. I was gonna say we could meet up, but
I mean, if you're in the library, I'm walking over that way. I'm gonna meet you in the lobby of the
all
library.
right. Yeah, I'm here.
All right.
I'm upstairs. Are you hopping on the Discord?
Yeah. How, like, the rock book table thing
Oh, you're
at the
talking-
library?
Yes. I just saw it. Yeah. I just saw that. I stopped in awe. That
Plan
was the
was
first time.
killed in Narnia. I always thought of that
Oh.
when I saw.
Thank you.
All right. So final thoughts. Stories.
That was a great conversation.
I would love to do an event on the 3 planes of consciousness and have students think about those 3.
Yeah.
Sounds
They
good.
changed
Some
the
way
ball.
make it interactive. I don't know how, but I wrote that down
Yeah.
as an idea.
Alex, do you,
Consider their lives in regard to those. Sorry.
no, my bad. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Good.
I was going to ask Alex, I know you got a lot of work, but would you be interested in trying to present something based on, where your thoughts are with all this stuff?
I mean, I'm down. I just have to you know, see what I'm like going through at school, but I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
I'd be okay, you know, especially, I mean, if it's about this stuff, I really truly believe that this stuff needs to be put out there because I feel like it can change a lot of people's lives, especially with, you know, depression and people feeling lost.
Yeah.
I feel like just a calling to do that kind of thing. So, yeah.
So you're studying OT, so in what capacity does that fit in, if you don't mind my asking, with
So occupational therapy it basically looks at the entire individual. So physical health, mental health, you know, getting them to do their activities of daily living properly every day. So like, you know, picking up a fork and eating and that kind of stuff. So it has a lot to do with the physical aspect, but it also has a lot to do with the spiritual and emotional aspects of, you know, life. So my goal is to, you know, implement the more spiritual aspect and open up like a clinic or some facility where I can teach that or have people come in and, you know, or work in a setting where I can focus on consciousness studies or spirituality in some light or use it as a treatment method because I really do, because it helped me a lot. And I feel like it's helped a lot of people. So I really do think that it's special and I can use it in my practice. So, yeah.
that would be really cool to hear about, you know, if you want to present on that.
Yeah, maybe I
anything
could.
else.
Yeah, I could. That's actually great. It's a great idea. I'll write that down. I'll like just keep it in the back of my head and like write down some ideas and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that idea too. I think
And now that
we
I'm
should do that.
not going to be kicked out of the hallway, but I don't know, Alex. That's interesting to hear that you're like in a STEM, because I mean that would be considered a STEM, like science, health science major, and the fact that you're kind of bringing a holistic approach to it. I've had through being like fully engulfed. I don't regret like pursuing a STEM major. I love oceanography. I love marine science and learning of those environments. It's just another avenue of me to kind of further discover. But I've like I told my example earlier. The more I learned of mathematics and physics and the physical sciences, the closer I felt to the things that you would think that don't necessarily relate. So I don't know if you like, from what it sounds like, you relate in that sense. When you're learning about the mechanics of the physical body, it's important to kind of incorporate the spirit and the soul. So I feel the same thing about my studies in physical sciences.
Aristotle felt the same way. My bad.
Yeah, no, you got it. It's fine.
You know, Aristotle, he often was considering what was going on in the cosmos and space, watching the planets and the stars rotate and orbit in their very particular motions. And they kept repeating that exact physical law of orbit. And for him, that was clearly the mark of intelligent behavior. Like patterns can only be followed by intelligence who can recognize a pattern and follow a pattern. So for him, he observed the physical behavior of the planets and the stars and said, that is evidence for God. So you're kind of saying the same thing, I think.
Yeah.
Metaphysics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like any experience with science, you kind of like dive deeper into when you could dive really deep into it, you start to realize it's all connected. And any field is connected to consciousness. So I feel like any devotion to a certain thing kind of brings you that awareness of consciousness in some light. You might not be aware of it, but I feel like, yeah. So maybe that with physical science for you and studying oceanography is bringing you closer to something that you're not really like in tune with yet, but you're starting to realize and put together, you know?
I might be feeling the foot of the elephant.
Yeah, exactly. Love it.
At least you know it's an elephant, though.
Yeah.
It's a shame that it was separated in science.
Well, that's why we're here. You know, we're going to help.
I think that behaviorism played a huge part in that, right? Do you guys know much about
Behaviorism?
behaviorism?
Huh.
Yeah, it's school of thought and psychology and early psychology research. That was one of the first. But I think somebody's waiting for me, so I gotta go.
Okay.
I'm like starting another conversation. But I'll meet you, Taylor, downstairs.
Yeah, right downstairs by the rock table or the lobby area.
All right, cool.
All right.
Hey guys.
Well, it
Thank
was really
you.
nice seeing everyone. Take care.
Yeah.
Alex,
Take it
I'm really interested in seeing your presentation. Please put something together.
I
Even
wrote
if
it
it's
down.
short.
It doesn't have to be too long. I'll just put something together.
Yeah.
So I'll think about it for sure.
All right.
All right, thanks guys. Take it easy.
Thanks for
Awesome.
everything,
Thank you.
everybody.
See ya.